أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. أشهد أن عليا ولي الله. أشهد أن عليا حجة الله. حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح حي على خير العمل حي على خير العمل. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله. لا إله إلا الله. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله وسلم.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونستهديه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهدي الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله سيد المرسلين وخاتم النبيين ورحمة للعالمين صلى الله عليه وعلى آله الطاهرين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا. أوصيكم عباد الله ونفسي بتقوى الله. Sisters and brothers in Iman, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Our respected brother Sheikh Muhammad Abbas basically insisted in a way that I couldn't say no. So I've come here not really prepared for the Friday khutbah, but since we are in the Azah of Sayyid al-Shuhada, there are many things related to that event. And I would like to basically talk about a very important aspect of the history of Karbala, and that is to do with the written will of Imam Hussein ibn Ali alayhi salatu wasalam that he wrote before departing from Medina. It's important to realize that this wasiyyat or this will was unlike the normal wills that we write. It's not about, what will happen to my assets after me, or where am I to be buried, nothing to do that. This was actually what I would call the mission statement of Imam Hussein and his movement. In the preamble, of course, he starts by praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and affirming his belief about the fundamentals of the Islamic faith. And then he says, and the will is actually addressed to his brother Muhammad Hanafiya, and because Imam alayhi salam had actually asked Muhammad bin al-Hanafiya to stay in Medina and regularly send reports about what is going on in Medina during his absence. So he addresses Muhammad Hanafiya, and there he actually talks about this issue in a very concise manner, because Hussein ibn Ali knew that people will come later on in history, historians, muhaddiseen, those who would be, social scientists looking at the events of Karbala, and they will try to analyze my purpose. What were the motives that I had when I went and stood up against the stand of Yazid bin Muawiyah? And so he made it very clear, and he left no room for anyone to ascribe any worldly motives or material motives to the mission of Hussein ibn Ali, where he begins by saying that lam akhruj ashiran wala bataran wala mufsidan wala zalima. He begins with negativity. He denies, he says, these four things are not part of my motivation. I have not risen here out of the sense of arrogance or like somebody who is looking for, adventure in life. I am not here to create facade and mischief in the society, nor I want to be unjust to anyone. Even when I'm opposing Yazid, there is no element of dhulm against Yazid. And after basically, rejecting the wrong motivations which could be ascribed to him, then he comes to the positive side, very much like, the kalima itself. It begins with La ilaha, then you come to illallah. So after denying all these, wrong motives, this is where he comes and he says, إنما خرجت لطلب الإصلاح في أمة جدي. And the word innama is very important in Arabic. This is used for to express the concept of exclusivity. Then my purpose is only one. My purpose basically is to seek reformation in the community of my grandfather. إنما خرجت لطلب الإصلاح في أمة جدي. Now this is a very important, relevant issue for our own time. And I'd like to just, draw the attention to the way Hussein describes his mission and his movement. He uses the word al-islah. إنما خرجت لطلب الإصلاح. I have risen against Yazid in order to seek islah. Islah means to reform things. You reform things when things are deformed. If they were not natural, if they were they're supposed to be, there is no issue of islah. Islah only comes when there are corruption and changes and problems. And so we see, for example, the word reform is used in different contexts in other religions also, and the history of other religions. And this is where we have to realize that there is a movement even now in the current Muslim world, and I would say even among some Shia circles, where they talk about reforming our faith. Hussein ibn Ali is very clear about his statement. He is saying that I seek reformation in the community of my father, my grandfather. He is not here to do the Islah of the deen of Muhammad. They're two different things. The deen is there, the religion is there. It is the ummah which has deviated and moved away from the deen of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so his mission is basically not to change Islam, not to reform Islam, if I might use that term, rather to reform the ummah. Those who go around, even among, some of the Shia circles talking about reforming Shia Islam, they have to think about it. You can talk about reforming the Shia community in order to bring them closer to the ideals of the Islam as taught by the Ahlul Bayt. But you can't talk about changing, the basic principles of Shia Islam. That is not open to any Islah as such. Yes, you had this Reformation movement in Germany against Catholic Church, and this is where you have the Protestant movement. We can't just look at that and say, okay, we have to do the same thing. No, Christianity and Islam are not same. And this is where we have to realize that the mission of Hussein ibn Ali was to reform the people, the ummah, the community of his grandfather, to bring them closer to the teachings of the pure Islam. Salawat. And I'll give you just one example of, when we talk about how the community has the ummah has deviated during those days. We are talking about only 50 years after the demise of the Prophet. You take the example of the most obvious ritual in Islam. And Salat is the most obvious one. People are required to say the prayers 5 times a day. The Prophet, we forget the era when he was in Mecca, look at the time when he was in Medina, and he used to go to masjid regularly for Fajr, for Zuhr, for Asr, for Maghrib and Isha. You even discount the time when he was traveling or in different, missions. So even if you look at, let's say, a number of 8 years, just think about it. The irony and the sad, feature of the ummah. Somebody for 8 years every day, 5 times a day, does the salat publicly, yet the Muslims are not sure. He used to do the hands down or here or somewhere here. The most obvious thing. And this is where we come to realize that the deviation, the changes brought, in the practices also. And this is where Hussein ibn Ali talks about, and of course, the most fundamental facade which needed to be corrected was the issue of leadership. Hussein ibn Ali could not tolerate this situation of indifference of the ummah when a person like Yazid bin Muawiyah comes to power and everybody is silent. Nobody was raising any voice of protest. And that is where Hussein ibn Ali comes forward and he says, I will publicly, define and reject the, this claim of leadership by Yazid ibn Muawiyah. Because that is the fundamental, deviation that Ummah had gone through. And this is where we see that, Hussein ibn Ali made it very clear that if I also give in to the bay'at, the demand of allegiance from Yazid bin Muawiyah, then that will be the end of Islam. You know these stories about what happened when Yazid sent the letter to Walid bin Utbah bin Abi Sufyan, the governor in Medina. There was a third person sitting there by the name of Marwan, one of the elders of Banu Umayyah in Medina. Next day, because Imam didn't leave Medina immediately and that night, it was the second night. Next day, Marwan met Imam in the streets and he tried to advise him. He said, why don't you accept Yazid? Why don't you do the bay'at and pledge allegiance to Yazid? This is for the good of your dunya and akhirah. MashaAllah, he wants to advise Sayyid al-Shabab Ahl Jannah about what is Jannah. And Hussein ibn Ali, the statement he made there is very powerful. He says, the day Islam is surrendering to Yazid bin Muawiyah, فَعَلَى الْإِسْلَامِ السَّلَامِ. I will fare badwill to that Islam. I wouldn't accept that Islam. And this is where we to realize that Hussein was basically the only, savior at that time who could rescue Islam from the clutches of people like Yazid bin Muawiyah. Inshallah, we'll continue the other part of the written will in the second khutbah. But remember that, the words of Hussein himself defining his mission is, إنما خرجت لطلب الإصلاح في أمة جدي. I have risen to seek reformation in the community of my grandfather. إن أحسن الحديث كتاب الله العزيز بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله الذي لا إله إلا هو الحليم الكريم غافر الذنب وقابل التوب وهو الغفور الرحيم. ونشهد أن لا إله إلا هو العطوف للعباد بجوده والعواد على المذنبين بحلمه. ونشهد أن محمدا نبيه وحبيبه سيد المرسلين وشفيع المذنبين ورحمة للعالمين صلى الله عليه وآله الداعين إلى سبيل الله بالحكمة والموعظة الحسنة قادة الأمم وأولياء النعمة ومعدن الرحمة. أوصيكم عباد الله بالتوبة ما سلف من ذنوبكم. Looking at the written will of Hussein ibn Ali, it's interesting that after explaining the purpose of his mission, where he says, I have risen only to seek reformation in the ummah and the community of my grandfather, then he actually explains to us what is the Shari'i basis for what he's doing. What are the Shari'i principles that he can justify that what I'm doing is based on these teachings. And that's where he says in the next sentence, he writes, وَأُرِيدُ أَنْ أَأْمُرَ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَأَنْهِيَ عَنِ الْمُنْكَرِ. He says, when I talk about reforming the ummah, what is the method I'm going to use? He says, I seek to promote good in the society and to discourage evil in the society. So the entire mission of Hussein ibn Ali actually is based on this most important social principle in Islam known as Al-Amr bil-Ma'ruf and Al-Nahy al-Munkar. This is something so important that unfortunately we as a Muslim community on a global level, we have forgotten the value of that. There is an American professor in Princeton, apparently non-Muslim, who actually has written a book consisting of 800 pages on Al-Amr bil-Ma'ruf and Nahy al-Munkar in English, where he talks about the four Sunni madhahib as well as the Ja'fari fiqh. And in the introduction to that book, he says something very amazing, and I thought maybe I'll share with you the importance of Al-Amr bil-Ma'ruf and Nahy al-Munkar. He says that we see in America, and he uses example of what is going on in America, that sometimes crimes happen in public space, yet people shy away from getting involved, trying to protect the victim. And especially he singles out a case of rape during the daytime in a train station in Chicago. He says, a crime was happening. This woman was crying for help, and there were people around. Nobody did anything. And then he says, if you look at our values, Christian values also, everybody knows it was a crime. It was wrong. And he says, even according to our moral values, somebody should have got involved to help that woman. But no one did anything. Then he says, the beauty of Islam is that Islam actually presented the concept, the wordings, and the rules about how to engage in promoting good and preventing evil. And this is where he says the words Al-Amr bil-Ma'ruf and Al-Nahy al-Munkar. He says you wouldn't find anything equivalent to that in Christian traditions, for example. And this is where we have to realize that when we talk about Al-Amr bil-Ma'ruf and Al-Nahy al-Munkar, this is how a Muslim community or a Muslim society or a Muslim country can maintain its Islamic identity. If they abandon this issue, they will gradually go down to the path where they cannot be even called properly, Islamic society. And so Hussein ibn Ali justifies his movement, his stand against Yazid in order to reform the ummah on the principles of Al-Amr bil-Ma'ruf and Al-Nahy anil Munkar. And then he writes something else towards the end of the will. He says, what I'm doing is not a bid'ah, it's another innovation. This is nothing new. He says, وَأَسِيرَ بِسِيرَةِ جَدِّي وَأَبِي عَلِي بِنْ أَبِي طَالِبٍ. He says, by doing what I'm doing, trying to reform the ummah on the principle of Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy al Munkar, I'm not doing anything new. What I'm doing is following the footsteps of my grandfather Rasulullah and my father Ali bin Abi Talib alayhi salatu wasalam. Salawat. It's important to realize that, he very clearly drew the Shi'i line there. He went from Rasulullah directly to his father to emphasize that our Islam, our values, and our teachings go from the Ahlul Bayt to the Prophet of Islam. Nobody is there in between. And so, keep in mind this will that Hussein ibn Ali left in a written form before leaving Medina, because that is the actual, mission statement of the movement of Hussein ibn Ali. We don't need any scholar or philosopher or social scientist or historian to come and tell us why did Hussein do this. You just go to that will. That is actually very clearly explaining what was the purpose of Hussein ibn Ali. And when we do the Azaa of Sayyid al-Shuhada, the same purpose should be in our mind. Our Azaa of Sayyid al-Shuhada should be a vehicle for promoting for ma'ruf and preventing munkar, and in a way we will be reforming ourselves individually and collectively to become better human beings, better Muslim, and better Shia of Ali bin Abi Talib alayhi salatu wasalam. Salawat. اللهم صل على سيد المرسلين وشفيع المذنبين نبينا محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم وعلى إمام المتقين وأمير المؤمنين علي بن أبي طالب صلوات الله عليه وعلى سيدة نساء العالمين سيدتنا فاطمة بنت رسول الله صلوات الله عليها وعلى سيد شباب أهل الجنة الحسن المجتبى والحسين الشهيد بكربلاء عليهم الصلاة والسلام. اللهم صل على أئمة المسلمين علي بن الحسين ومحمد بن علي وجعفر بن محمد وموسى بن جعفر وعلي بن موسى ومحمد بن علي وعلي بن محمد والحسن بن علي عليهم الصلاة والسلام. اللهم صل على مولانا الحجة بن الحسن صاحب العصر والزمان. ماحي آثار البدء والطغيان هادم أبنية الشرك والنفاق حاصد فر البغي والشقاق صلوات الله وسلامه عليه وعلى آباء الكرام ما اتصلت الليالي والأيام. اللهم عجل فرجه وسهل مخرجه واكحل ناظرنا بنظرة منا إليه واجعلنا من المستشهدين بين يديه. اللهم اجعلنا ممن يذكر فتنفعه الذكرى. إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون.